Hi, Noel Chemists. This is the last video of this checkpoint. Again, this is going to be a brief video. There's some things that I really want to emphasize. For this checkpoint, you're going to be doing a reading that's critically important, not only to your understanding of chemistry, but to your specific understanding of the element, of the molecule that you have decided to adopt for this project. So I'm going to share my screen, and I want us to take a look at what your checkpoint looks like. Here you are at checkpoint 3. You've done activity 1 and activity 2, and it asks you to read an article. If you click on the article, this is what comes up. It's called Molecule Characteristics. And I want to draw your attention to something here. It says, when atoms join other atoms to form molecules, the chemical and physical properties of the compounds are different from those of the elements from which they were formed. So when atoms join other atoms to form molecules, the chemical and physical properties of these molecules and these compounds are different from those chemical and physical properties of the elements from which they are formed. What does this mean? Well, I want to jump down to another paragraph. The molecular formula for sugar is C6H12O6. We know now from our study of chemistry that C is carbon, H is hydrogen, O is oxygen. So these three elements are combining to make sugar or glucose. So it's 6 atoms of carbon, 12 atoms of hydrogen, and 6 atoms of oxygen. So 6 carbon, 12 hydrogen, 6 oxygen. We know carbon is an element in the periodic table, and it's often black and found in powder form. It's the major component of coal, and that's why we have this black appearance when coal is burnt. So we know that hydrogen is the lightest gas known, and we know that oxygen is also a gas in the air, and it's needed for living things to breathe, and it causes fires to burn. But when these substances are combined, these two gases and this black powdery substance, which is carbon, we get something that's white and crystalline, like sugar. It has a sweet taste. It's soluble or dissolvable in water. And the properties of sugar are unlike the properties of the elements carbon, hydrogen, or oxygen. Carbon is a black powder. Hydrogen is the lightest gas, and oxygen is also a gas. So these original elements from which this compound is made, carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, can still be recovered if we react sugar under extreme conditions. We can get back to these basic elements. But once we combine them and make sugar, the characteristics, both physical and chemical, of that new molecule are very different. Physically, it's not a gas and it's not a black powder. It is a white crystalline structure, and it is not a gas like hydrogen and oxygen. It's not a powder like carbon. It's a crystalline solid. So I want you to read the rest of this article because it also talks about the way we combine hydrogen and water, to hydrogen and oxygen, to form water, H2O. And if we add an extra O in there, we get hydrogen peroxide, which many of you know is something that we use to bleach or to clean. So again, this is a very interesting article because it teaches us a little bit about the way in which combining elements changes the property of the substance that you create. And so I want you to keep this in mind as you take a look at your own molecules, which you have adopted, looking at not only their chemical formula, but looking at the ways in which when you combine those elements into that molecule, the elements change properties. Okay, so once you've read this article, you're going to return to the checkpoint and you're going to write a 7 to 10 sentence answer to this prompt. When atoms join other atoms to form molecules, are the chemical and physical properties of the compounds different from those of the elements from which they are formed? Why is that? And can you give 3 examples? And one example we just talked about, sugar, which is very different than the powdery black carbon or the 2 gases, hydrogen and oxygen, from which it comes from. It's white and a crystalline solid, and it has very different properties. It's sweet tasting, and it dissolves in water, and it doesn't have any of those characteristics that we see in its individual elements. So the act of combining and bonding these elements together changes the chemical and physical property of the molecule we form, and that's what you need to articulate and write here in this checkpoint. And remember, we want to keep in mind about grammar and spelling and punctuation so that your response is the very best it can be, both in terms of its content and in terms of its grammatical, its grammar, its spelling, and its punctuation. Okay, guys, take care. Good night.